My name is David Grosz, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Artifex Press. So I'm going to briefly discuss what we're doing at Artifex Press, and then I'm going to get into today's talk and our two speakers. Artifex Press is a new publisher of digital catalogs raisonné. The catalog raisonné, as you know, is a supposedly definitive list of an artist's each and every artwork. But in fact, these catalogs are often full of errors, and they become obsolete almost the moment that they are published. So what we're doing at Artifex Press is we're creating an innovative publishing platform and cataloging process that responds to these problems and meets the needs of contemporary artists. We're currently working on catalogs for Sol LeWitt and Agnes Martin, and we have commitments from about a dozen more artists that we'll be announcing shortly. As we develop our publishing platform, we're also sponsoring a series of public discussions about some of the key conceptual issues related to the cataloging process. Last fall, we had a talk at MoMA on the theme of artist intention. The panelists were Robert Ryman, Tony Fair, and Jim Hodges, and Jock Reynolds, director of the Yale University Art Gallery, moderated. Our second talk was this spring, also at MoMA. This was on the theme of restaging performance works. The panelists were Klaus Biesenbach, Martha Rosler, Janine Antoni, and Francesco Vezzoli, and Jens Hoffman, director of the CCA Wattis Institute, moderated that talk. And if anyone's interested, videos of both are available on our website. Today is going to be the third talk in our series. It's a more intimate format than we've done before. We have just two panelists. We have an artist, Laurice Gréaud, and a critic and curator, Nicolas Bourriaud. And what we're going to talk about, more or less, is really the most basic question of all when it comes to cataloging, which is, how do you define a work of art? How flexible are the boundaries of its identity? How does reinstalling a work in a new venue affect it? At what point have you changed so much that you've created an entirely new work? The concept for this talk came out of our own thinking on the catalog raisonné. When we think of a catalog raisonné, we think of an exhaustive, thick, heavy, fusty volume that might take decades to research and publish. This sort of catalog, however, is a product of an earlier time and is shaped by two paradigms. On the one hand, there's the paradigm of book publishing. There's certain forms that bound pages of printed paper lend themselves to. And this obviously had an impact on the development of the catalog raisonné. Artifex Press is going to be taking advantage of all of the multimedia tools and the flexibility of digital publishing, and we're going to essentially reinvent what the catalog raisonné is. I think the second paradigm that's contributed to the form of the catalog raisonné was a certain conception of an artwork. At the time the catalog raisonné became an art world institution, no one doubted that an artwork was a singular object that you could attach a date to, you could measure, and you could fix in a single place. Obviously, the conception of the artwork has changed over time, and today's catalogs really have to account for this new idea of what an artwork might be. So it's this new expanded notion of an artwork that I want to talk about, and I think it's a concept that's central to the practice of Laurice and to the criticism of Nicolas. And so I think we've got two excellent people to talk about this today. All right, let me give quick introductions, and then we'll get into this. Laurice Gréaud belongs to a young generation of French artists that has emerged over the last few years. He is trained in a variety of disciplines, including music, graphic design, and filmmaking, and he regularly collaborates with scientists, engineers, filmmakers, writers, sound designers, and other experts in their fields, and he treats them as co-authors of his work. He's had solo exhibitions at the Palais de Tokyo, at the Centre Pompidou, and the ICA in London. In 2005, he was awarded the Ricard Essay Award for the most innovative artist under 40 years of age in France. Nicolas Bourriaud, to my left, is a curator and critic. He co-founded and directed the Palais de Tokyo from 1999 to 2006. He was a curator of contemporary art at the Tate Britain, where he organized their 2009 triennial, which was titled Alter Modern. He is the author of several important critical works, including Relational Aesthetics, Post-Production, and most recently, The Radicant. All right, so now we will get into things. Can we put up the... Okay. All right, so my first question is for you, Loris. When we talk about your art, I'm not even sure that the word work is really the right place to begin. I know that you often use the word trajectory, and I'm wondering if you can explain what you mean by this and maybe refer to your work Cellar Door, which we have up here on the screen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I talk more about project than works, and nowadays we can consider that a work of art have no center anymore and is composed by trajectories, and like Nicolas used to say, no more destination. And for example, this project called Cellar d'Or have several kind of manifestation, and there is few station of the show, institutional station like Palais de Tokyo, ICA of London, Kunsthalle of St. Gallen, Murcia Conservera, and the end of the project will happen this February at Yvon Lambert, New York, and Pace Gallery, New York. But also, we can consider that the work is somewhere else. The project Cellar d'Or try to answer a few questions and few obsessions. For example, how do you produce a show that could be replayed? And so one of the answers was to use a score. And the center of this project is the obsession of the construction of my own studio. So I try to make work composer and architect to make a kind of equivalence between score and architecture. So this is an example.
Okay. Now, Nicolas, you've proposed that, that postmodernism is dead and that we now live in an era of the alter modern. I'm wondering if you can just explain for us what this means and also try and tell us how does Loris's work fit into this concept?
Well, there would be several ways, to get into this idea. Maybe I'm going to stick to the formal aspects of it. I think what's really striking in the art that interests me in the last, at least in the last 15 years, is this way to the way artists are inventing at the moment a kind of new way to compose an artwork. And I really think that the main characteristics of this attempt to define a new form would be the dynamization of the process, actually. In other words, I really think that first, we are living in an era where translation has become the main virtue, in a way. Translate can be, for example, for an artist to translate a sound into a form, to translate an architecture into a visual art project, etc., etc. There is a chaining of elements, and if you look at Loris's work, for example, which is a good example of it, you will find at many levels of his composition process a translation of a form into another one, a translation of an element into another one that belongs to another discipline, for example, or another category. This translating process is to me at the core of today's aesthetics in some ways, and for many reasons. The first one, and it's related, of course, to I think the end of postmodernism, is the horizontalization of the world itself. Postmodernism, for me, is still a kind of binary way of thinking. It's the colonized and the colonized. It's us and the others. It's the other and me. It's always a binary way of thinking, which denounces all the time binarism, and it's a kind of paradox, according to me. But it's still, a way of thinking which is totally influenced and totally under that exists within the frame of a binary way of thinking. I think the horizontalization, the pluralization of the world today, the art world, and also the general system in which we live, produces a specific need for translation. And what's interesting in translation is that it's never possible to translate everything. There is something that remains. There is a remain in translation, whatever you do, actually. If you want to translate any French poem into English or vice versa, you will always have something which resists and which produces a kind of singularity. It's, in a way, leads me to another aspect of this culture of translation, which is topology. For me, this very specific branch of mathematics, which is topology, which I really feel the presence of in Larisse's work, is, according to me, the dominant and the most interesting and important way today to describe the world we live in. Actually, you can see, for example, even in the art fair here, you will see Peter Coffin's, knots. It's topology. It's at the Emmanuel Perrotin's booth, I think. You can see also Pierre Huyghe, who himself developed a few diagrams by Jacques Lacan, which are actually topological diagrams. What is topology? It's very simple. It's a mathematical translation. You transpose the characteristics of a mathematical object into something else all the time. And it's a way to spatialize mathematics. And it's also then, of course, a translation. It needs to be a translation. The third one would be our obsession with traceability. Actually, it goes back to the beginning of the end of the 1990s with the mad cow disease. Everybody was talking about traceability of the cow, and suddenly it became a kind of it revealed a kind of obsession. We need to know where do things come from. We track them down in history in a way, and this is another way to translate the product into the multiple dots of its origins. It's also a matter of translation. So I think the general configuration of the cultural field in which we all live is based on translating actions in some ways. And this is something which is, according to me, is very new. Of course, there was always translations in the past. But the fact that it really comes at the center of cultural debates indicates, according to me, a new priority in the art world.
Can I ask a quick follow-up, which is, I'm curious about the evolution of your own thinking as we move from, say, relational aesthetics to post-production to the radicant. Is each step is this a single intellectual trajectory? Is each one of these concepts, in effect, a translation of the previous, or are they three distinct ideas?
I think you can find very easily some common points between the three, and the main one, according to me, the deepest one, I would say, is the very violent criticism of the idea of the notion of origin, actually. It's the way one can privilege in his or her, thought, interactions, or insertion, or dynamics rather than origins. You know, I think the common point between everything I ever wrote was this condemnation of origins.
Of origins.
So as a way to explain the world, as support for identity, so-called identity, which I think is much more complex than the idea of belonging to one or another, you know, community, for example. I think it's not a matter of identity; it's a matter of, well, let's not go too much into this. But I think that this criticism of origins might be the source, let's say, of the three books.
Okay.
One could name also other notions, but I think that's what I want to stress on.
Okay. How does this idea, this criticism of origins, I mean, how does that inform your work?
It led me to think about the fact that as an artist, I believe that artists are not in the economy of forms and ideas. So this criticism of Nicolas led me to think about that. Of course, we don't care about. I mean, we could be really suspicious about this idea of origin, and to link to the other idea of translation. I think there is another way of looking at it about trying to make an equivalence, like I stated before, between architecture and score, or I don't know, the experiment that we've done about this recording of ECG. Maybe I can talk a bit about this work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, actually, this work is the origin of the project Curator. So it's like a paradox about what we just stated, but everything is built into paradox. So, in 2006, I just decided to record the precise moment of thought, the precise moment where you make those chain of thought between forms and ideas and project and equivalence. So I found, first of all, I searched lots of neurologists, which is a tricky thing to find neurologists that accept to work with an artist. And I found a neurologist that accept to do the experiment of recording my brain activity, the electrical activity of the brain while I'm thinking of forms and ideas. And then from there, I was thinking about this whole project of Curator and all those ideas of equivalence. And from this recording, we had multiple forms that coexist, like Nicolas said, horizontally. I made, for example, we take the frequency and we made, I said we because I work as a studio, we made a light bulb that could flicker to the brain activity belonging to the brain frequency. This trigger, for example, it pops the image of the cartoon image of this character. When you're a cartoon character and you have an idea, you always have this light bulb. So this is one way of seeing the work. Also, what we did after that is transform this record into frequency, into vibration. And this is the work that Nicolas have chosen for the Alter Modern show at the Tate, and we installed this work. So this is, I guess, an example of translation of a form and making equivalence of.
Okay. But doesn't, I guess what I'm curious about, I mean, a translation presupposes an original, right? And you were talking about, Nicolas, that something remains with each translation. Yeah. So there's something there.
There's a remain, but this remain has no, well, it could also be a translation object in some ways. You know, you can always make the ball, you know, roll around, you know, all the time. And I think that's the way. It's. I could also sum up the three books you were mentioning through the idea of activity. Actually, the most important being to refuse a kind of passive attitude towards culture, in a way. So you have to insist on the role of the beholder within the process of meaning, for example, in relational aesthetics. So to explore the blurrings of the role of the producer and the consumer in post-production, or also to envision culture today as a kind of dynamic and routing, rather than a kind of fixed, route, a single route, solution. So that's more or less also another level of understanding and another level of my work, I would say. But where did we start from?
Well, let's take like
just to finish with this idea of the origin and to say the contrary of what I've just said, is if you think about a work that has no center, if you think about a work that is displayed in space and time, then there is no origin because there is no center.
There is a start, but the start is not necessarily the origin.
Exactly.
That's what I mean.
Exactly.
Okay,
but
so
what's going on if you record the start? What's going on if you record the moment of your thought, like I did? So it's a kind of, what I meant is that if you imagine a work which is only composed with trajectories of thought and forms, and then there is no more center and no more start. Or there is.
Talking about the difference between start and origins, if you take the Star Wars, series by George Lucas, the first film is not the beginning of the story, which arrives at the fourth, occurrence, So the end of a story, can be actually, before the start of the process.
Right.
That's kind of a paradox, but it's a more interesting way to talk about the start of a project.
Okay. Wow. So let me ask you, Laurice, about your project, which is ongoing right now, called the Snorks. Can you first of all just describe that briefly, the various stages of that?
The project is called the Snorks, coming from the cartoon, and it's called the Snorks, a concert for creators. So to sum up a bit the project is, I've been working with the MIT Sea Grant College, and I've taken lots of attention about the depths of our ocean, which start with a complete paradox about the fact that we know better the surface of the moon than the depths of our ocean. It means that we have been able to create the technologies to go on the surface of the moon to look at the fact that there is absolutely nothing there, and we don't even know what's going on in the depths of our ocean. And recently, we start developing some technologies to go into the depths. We never go. We just know that the more profound depths is higher than the top of our biggest mountain. But what we've observed is that we have some complete new forms of life, a complete new chain food reproduction system. We've seen that some creatures are able to make photosynthesis in the dark. Some creatures never die. They just like stay they just freeze and reborn. So basically what James Graham Ballard was saying that Earth is the only alien planet, that is true. So I've been looking at this creature and specifically about this idea of bioluminescence, because the conditions are really extreme. It's really cold and absolutely dark. So the creature naturally have created some bioluminescence to lots of purpose. For example, they could squirt a fluid that become bioluminescent 2 seconds after to create a decoy for predators. But they also create some bioluminescence to communicate. And working with the MIT, we just saw that those creatures are responding to frequency. And then it popped up the idea that if we make some sound for those creatures, then we could make them flicker. And to take a shortcut, we decided to organize a concert for those creatures. So the project getting more complex now because it's actually what we've been talking about before. It's lots of different steps, lots of different.
So can you just tell us quickly what are the 5 steps of this work?
Okay, basically we are making a movie. We're making a film out of this.
Okay.
The first step is when I received the image of the MIT, the first movie of those creatures producing bioluminescence, they were look like underwater fireworks.
Uh-huh.
So it led me to the idea that to make a nice equivalence, I could find some pyrotechnician that are going to be able to recreate in the sky the bioluminescence that we see in the depths and make a parallel and an equivalence between what we observe in the depths of our ocean and what we could see in the sky. So I worked with Group F, and we designed in laboratory a firework that could really look like the creatures. So this is the first step. The second step was to broadcast. So this is the first movie that we shoot. And we broadcast it on Times Square screen, which is maybe the place of publicity, but it's also an electronical fireworks, and it's also flickering everywhere, like the depth. So we shoot this. And then we commissioned a band called Anti-Pop Consortium, which are making abstract hip-hop. And we asked them to make some specific composition and specific lyrics for the creators. And then the idea was to record Anti-Pop Consortium, and with the MIT Sea Grant College, we're going to put the recording into 2 UV lab, 2 submarine, and broadcast the concert to the creators. And we hope that they're going to respond like they always do.
Uh-huh.
So the whole project is about translation and equivalence, and yeah.
Okay.
It makes me think of this Pasolini movie, Uccellaci e Uccellini, you know, when St. Francis tries to communicate with the birds, and he tries with sounds first, and those little birds just don't understand what he means, you know, so he spends years like this, and then he understands that he has to communicate with them through the way they just, you know, jump. You know, so he developed a kind of dance, a kind of choreographic language, which makes him able to communicate with the birds. So it's more or less this kind of thing. You start from a gesture, and it's a translating, you know, system that allows you at the end, you know, to find the right position, you know, and that's interesting equivalence with your expertise.
I mean, I think what's interesting is to the extent that there's an origin, it's the fish themselves, right? And then it's also the end point of the work. I mean, you begin and end with the fish.
Actually, there's lots of uncertainty in the project, and I'm not sure that it starts with the fishes. It start with the fishes. It start with the video that was striking, and those scientists that were starting to talk about underwater fireworks and those beautiful images. So I don't know yet what's going to be the end, if there's an happy ending of this project, because we don't know yet how the creators are going to react.
I mean, you actually write in your press for this piece, you write, this is where, talking about the final video, this is where the project will be reached, realized, rewarded, or maybe it won't.
Yes, exactly.
How would you feel if it isn't reached or realized?
I don't know. I think that's really part of the project. It's like what Nicolas is talking about also in the Radicant. It's like a journey. We're making experiments, working with scientists. We're going to go in this bay in Hawaii, launching the submarine, and we hope to have a response of this creature called the diatoms. But the failure is part of the project as well. If it fails, it's still the project.
It still produces something anyway, you know.
Failure
is product forms.
Maybe a bad movie.
Maybe a bad movie.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're getting the signal to wrap it up. Does anyone have questions in the audience? Yeah?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was interested, I understand entirely the idea of translation, and that would seem to make sense, but where I thought it seemed slightly unusual, and I wondered if I misunderstood, but presumably at some point there must be an artist who has, if you like, a right to use something, so that this idea of source becomes very much wrapped up in where one comes from and who one is. For example, you wouldn't think much of me if I was making my new South African-looking art. You would wonder why I had a right to do this, and people would think it was inauthentic. So I just wondered what you would wonder, what your view is of authenticity and the idea that actually sometimes in life some people have a real background and a real knowledge of something which generates and comes into their art.
I don't think I'm interested very much in the concept of authenticity. I think I would translate that in my own language, saying that as an artist, you express the sum of your experiences and your trajectory, and the trajectory, could be a kind of translation of authenticity in some ways. But authenticity in itself, it implies a kind of fake loyalty to, or being obliged to answer a question that you're not asked, actually, in some ways. I don't know if I'm authentic. Authentic to what? Would that be a fake, a copy of something? So what would be the original in this way? Am I supposed to speak like a Frenchman because I'm French, for example? What does it exactly mean? It means that you imply, a certain type of codes or certain types of attitudes. I prefer betrayals, actually. It's good to betray your culture. It's good to betray your own experience sometimes.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, and kind of the thing I read and the thing I believe in, I think nowadays, it's maybe a bit extreme, but I think nowadays, like, fake and authenticity, reality, and all those notions are completely equivalent. Like, we now live in a world of absolute relativity. That's what I believe in. So, I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm not asking myself about fake and authenticity. For me, it's really the same.
Okay. Any other questions?
What's your relation, your practical relation to transcendental phenomenology? So my question, I think, I might feel that behind the no origin or everywhere origin, the transcendental phenomenology is a quite important issue.
It's not an issue, is that?
Sorry, it's an important
issue.
Yes, you didn't mention it. So you didn't go from the step of non-origin to everything origin or all origin, which is a kind the transcendental phenomenology.
But there would be another, maybe way to avoid, which would be to oppose the notion of origins and a kind of permanent, transcendental, an ontology of non-being in some ways. And I don't believe, one should oppose, in such a binary way, both options. I think that the idea of origins is not what constitutes the subject. What constitutes the subject for me is the itinerary of this subject. And it's almost a topological way of seeing what a human being is in some ways. So I wouldn't, oppose both ways in such a...
And I think, to take an example, I don't know if it's the right one, but things nowadays with quantum physics and quantum mechanics, all those ideas, all those notions that we are talking about become really more complex. I was having this discussion with Hans-Ulrich Obrist and the great Professor Anton Zeilinger about quantum teleportation. And in 2005, Anton Zeilinger have teleported a particle of light, a photon, from one side of the Danube to the other side. And it raised the most important philosophical question nowadays is like, it's the idea of the original becoming redundant, because there is a breakdown of the original. And the photon that we get on the other side contain the exact same characteristic than the first one, but the first one is no more exists. So could we answer about the fact that the one on the other side is also the original? So I mean, we can't really answer those things. It's like,
okay. Anyone else? Do you want to? Yeah?
I just wanted to ask a question about the fashion in art for backstories, so that you approach a painting with a red dot and the artist tells you that his mother died of a blood clot. Or, so that in a way, if you understand what I mean, artists often have a narrative now around their art, so that the history of modernism now is being turned into these occasions where someone like Simon Starling, the piece is apparently a shed, but we hear a long story about turning it into a boat. And it just seems interesting to me the way quite often very simple works, you then need like a Hollywood film to hear about what they were thinking. And you mentioned about the submarine and the pop group, and I mean, I like it, I think it's good, but I just wondered if you had any reaction to this modern trend for backstory art.
I mean, there is two things about what you're saying. There is like the backstory, and I think Simon Starling is a perfect example, because it's a work that is completely composed with trajectories, right?
Yeah.
And also, the second thing that you are saying leads me to this idea of being reasonable. And while we were talking about this yesterday night and laughing about it, because, I mean, if I have to answer my project and my obsession using a group of abstract hip-hop and using MIT Submarine, is that I have to do it. And I mean, I don't want to be reasonable at all. I've been asked with the crisis, it's the consequences to be reasonable. But like, if you start asking artists, some artists, to be reasonable, that's the end of everything. No? That's not what you state?
I can,
no?
Maybe I can answer it in a very ambitious cultural anthropological way, if I can allow myself to do it. I think that nowadays we actually develop new abilities, slowly, which lead us to apprehend those kind of works in a more, which are more complex, more articulated in time and space. For example, just let me give you a very simple example. Till, I would say, the 19th century, but still in the 20s, it was approachable, the idea of an absolute knowledge in a very specific discipline was kind of possible. You could reach this kind of completeness. Today, even talking about contemporary art, which is a very narrow field, I would not be able to say that I know everything that's going on. It's impossible. So we gave up totally the idea of completeness, of the possibility to embrace the totality of any discipline, any field of knowledge. So what's left? That's very interesting, because we have the technology for it now. What's left is our ability to navigate throughout the different dots that we need to, in order to produce our itinerary, our trajectory, in some words. So these types of works, and their structure, which is, time-based, also as much as space-based, using different spaces, using different times. We are getting close to be able actually to embrace it in a very natural way, I think, more and more. And well, it was a formal approach, let's say.
So does an artwork then, or this idea of a journey, it needs to have a narrative as part of that?
Yeah, any movement produces narrativity in some ways. No? So I think, yeah, it's totally impossible to divide, forms and narrativity.
But is that kind of narrative different from the backstory that he's talking about, or are they the same thing?
I think they might be the same thing, actually, in some ways. Backstories, yeah, why not? It's like subtitles, or dubbing, or...
Okay. All right.
And there's a subtitle
I think that's that's the end of this. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.